Hello, Jacqueline from Jack Knits here, and today we're going to learn how to do an alternate cast-on method, which is a great one to have in your repertoire of cast-ons available to choose from. This one is called the cable cast-on, and it produces this really nice, sturdy, durable cast-on edge that has a real definition to it. It almost looks like a nice, sturdy rope at the bottom of your knitted project. So it makes for a great cast on if you want something that's a little bit durable or something that stands up a little bit better or just has a more definition. So this is the cable cast on, and let's take a look at how to do this. Okay, I'm going to actually show you how to do the cable cast on with both flat needles and how to do it if you are wanting to do the cable cast on in the round. There's a couple additional tips and tricks I want to show you for doing it in the round that may make it a little bit more of a finished look. So let's first take a look at how to do it flat. I am using a US size 10 needle with a bulky weight yarn, but of course this cable cast on can be done with any size yarn or any needle. So to start the cast on, we're going to just create a slip knot first. So we're just going to make a little loop, bring in that yarn up through that loop and place it on one of our needles and give it a nice little tightness to your needle. Then we're going to start by knitting that first stitch, just as if you're just going to knit regularly. But as you pull it through, give it an extra little pull so you've got some give here, a little gap. And now we're going to take our left needle, wrap it around, and place it up through that stitch on your right needle. So now you've got a stitch on the left needle, your slip knot, and then one more stitch. Okay, now the next step is to take your right needle, and instead of inserting it in here like you would to knit, we're going to insert it right between the two stitches. See how it's going right between the two, and we're going to knit it that way. Bring it through, and again we're going to do the same step we did earlier. We're going to kind of pull it through so we have a little give there, and take that left needle again, wrap it over and up through that stitch, and place the next stitch on your needle. Now we're going to continue with that last step all the way till we have the desired stitches on our needle. Okay, so now we're going to again stick it through that center between those two stitches, knit it, give it a pull, wrap it around, and place it on your needle. Okay, let's keep doing that for a few more stitches. And then I want to show you a nice little tip as you're knitting that first row. So I'll just get a few more stitches available on this needle, and then I'll show you what to do with that first row of knitting. Okay, now that I've got a few stitches cast on with that cable cast on method, you can now just kind of begin to start knitting. We'll start knitting that first stitch, and we're going to knit across. And you'll notice when we get to the last couple stitches, remember when we knitted those or cast on those first few stitches, that first stitch was actually a slip knot. The second stitch was actually a result of us knitting through that slip knot and placing a stitch on our needle. That was this stitch. Here was that slip stitch. So those really did not conform to the pattern that we were doing later on, which was sticking the needle through those two stitches and adding a stitch that way. So these are a little different from the rest of the stitches, and I don't really care for those. That slip knot and this first stitch, it really doesn't have the same look as the rest, so we're just going to get rid of them. I'm just going to pull this slip knot out and get rid of those non-conforming stitches. So now the rest of our stitching cast on looks the same. So because you're getting rid of those first two stitches, remember that you're always going to want to cast on 2 more stitches than what the pattern calls for. So if your pattern calls for 20 stitches to cast on 22, because you're going to want to drop those first 2 stitches. So now you can continue to knit, and your cast on edge will look nice and consistent. So now let me show you how to do this same cast on but in the round, because I've got a couple extra tricks for you to make it look perfect. Okay, let's take a look at how to do this cable cast on in the round. There's just a couple extra little tips I want to show you after you cast on. So the actual cast on is the exact same way as if you were knitting it flat. So the same method I showed you for knitting it on a flat needle applies to knitting, casting on a round needle. You're just using a round needle instead of a flat. So I've already done that. I've knitted or casted on several stitches on my circular needle. And now I would normally begin by joining and working in the round. But I want to show you something on this cast on. If you look really closely at this nice cast on edge, you'll see that this side of the cast on has got this nice single loop rope that gives it that really nice finished look. And that's what we're kind of looking for with this cast on, that nice finished loop. But if you turn it over to the other side isn't quite as nice. If you look carefully, you can see that it kind of consists of two loops, not that nice single rope strand. So this is obviously just not as attractive, and this is the wrong side of the cast on, where this is the right side of the cast on. Now when you're knitting flat, that works out great, because after you're done casting on over here at the end, you will just start to knit, and this does become the right side of your work, and you've got that beautiful cast on facing you, and that is what you want. But when you're working in the round, after you cast on and you want to join, you're going to have to kind of turn your work so that your working yarn is on the right side of your circular needle, and then you would join to knit in that fashion. But look what happens. Now this not as attractive side is now facing me, and that would become my working or my right side of the fabric, and that's not what I want. I would really prefer to have this as my correct side. So it's an easy fix. All that we're going to do is just knit one row flat first before we join in the round. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to knit this first row flat, and I'm also going to do that same principle that we did with working in the flat by dropping those first few stitches, that slip knot in that first stitch. So the same principle applies, where you will want to cast on 2 more stitches than what the pattern calls for, so you can drop those first few cast on stitches that are not conforming to the rest of the pattern. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to knit to the end of this row, drop those first couple stitches, and then show you how to join in the round with that right side facing you. Okay, I finished knitting that one first row, drop those first few cast on stitches, and now I can join in the round, because now my good side of the cast on is now facing me, and that will become the right side of the fabric. So that is what we're looking for. So now I can join in the round, and when you join in the round, of course, you just got to make sure that your cast on edge is all facing the center of your circle. You don't want to have any twisted stitches there. So just make sure it's facing the center. We'll take our working yarn, and we'll begin by just joining our yarns, knitting that first stitch with the working yarn on our right side of the circular needle. So I'm going to knit a few more rows, so I'm in position to show you this last little tip to help tidy up this knitting when you do this cable cast on in the round. So stick around for that, because it's an important final step to make this cast on look nice and seamless for you. All right, now that I've knitted a couple more rows, I'm going to show you one final tip to make this cast on jogless for your knitting in the round. Because we did not join in the round until after that first row, not until that second row, you'll notice that we've got this ugly little gap in our cast on edge when we're knitting in the round, and we certainly do not want a gap in our knitting like that. So we're going to just simply take our tail from our cast on and graft in a stitch, so we can kind of close up that gap, so it'll be a nice jogless edge to our cast on. Now you can do this when you're all done with your knitting and when you're weaving in your ends, but I'm going to do it while my stitches are still on the needle, just to save some time. So take your cast on and thread it onto a darning needle, and let's take a look at these stitches here. You'll see that this is the very first stitch that I knitted when we knitted in the round, but I want to join this very first row. So this is our V from that first stitch we knitted. Here's the V from that cast on edge that I want to join. So with our tail, let's move our working yarn kind of out of the way here. And we're going to take our darning needle and slip it through both V's of this first stitch of the, or the last stitch there of the cast on edge. So right in that stitch, let's pull it through. Now we're just going to give it a nice pull and see how that closes that gap up nicely. So now let's secure that a little bit more by going into this very first stitch on the other side of the gap, just in that first little leg there. Pull it through there, give it a nice stitch or a nice pull. Now you can see that our cast on edge just seamlessly flows from one side to the other. So now you can take your tail here, bring it around to the back, and you can weave in your ends here. So now we've got a nice little jogless end here where you don't see the flow of the stitches, and it's a great way to wrap up that knitting for knitting in the round with the cable cast on. So I hope you found this helpful and you give this beautiful cable cast on stitch a try. It makes a beautiful edging for your projects. So if you like what you see in this video, don't forget to give me a thumbs up, subscribe to receive notifications of new videos all about knitting tips and stitches and creative patterns. Thanks for watching, knitting friends. Happy knitting.